Hi there, everyone. I'm Jonathan DeYoe, the author of Mindful Money, Simple Practices for Reaching Your Financial Goals and Increasing Your Happiness Dividend. We all have a deeply emotional connection to money, and today on the show, we're going to explore that connection.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Let's face it, things have been a little financially unstable lately. In 2019, the market was at an all-time high. Then in 2020, there was the biggest drop since the Great Depression. How do you stay mindful about your finances while weathering a financial storm? Well, stay focused because we're about to discover just how to do that. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I am the Dragonist, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. You can find out more about me at dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives is brought to you in part by Magcast. Imagine having your own industry magazine. What would that do for your authority? Well, whether you're a coach or a content expert or an emerging brand, it's hard to stand out from the crowd. So what if there was a proven way for you to increase both your perceived authority and your professional status in the eyes of your market, and to do so all at once? Well, this is your way to go from being invisible to getting meetings with anyone. Find out more by going to magcast.co. That's magcast.co. That's C-O, where first-time publishers are creating thriving magazine businesses. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any past episodes inside of our Facebook and LinkedIn groups by looking for Leadership and Loyalty Podcasts. If you're a new listener to the show, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. And we always need your help, so please get over there, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you're a regular listener, big thank you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show. We're excited and honored to be great and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. Again, I want to thank you for sharing the show with everyone you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. Let's face it, whether money in whatever form it's in, it's the center of business. And if you are an investor in the first quarter of 2020, it might have made you a little bit seasick with an all-time ups and downs. And how do you stay centered? How do you stay focused in this turbulence? Well, we all know that leadership circles, mindfulness has grown in its popularity. So here's the question. Could you use the stock market's volatility as your meditation? Could you and I use the ups and downs of the market to center ourselves and stay mindful? Well, we're about to find out because my guest on this episode is Jonathan DeYoe. Now, Jonathan is the author of Mindful Money, Simple Practices for Reaching Your Financial Goals and Increasing Your Happiness Dividends. He has been educating students and employees about money while also directly helping families with financial planning and investing for 20 years. Jonathan believes that everyone benefits from some kind of financial planning and no one should be ashamed of the form they want that planning to take. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome the author of Mindful Money, Mr. Jonathan DeYoe. The crowd goes wild, young man. Good to have you, mate.
It's so great to be here, Dov. What a great intro, man. You've done this a few times, I think.
Yeah, I think I'm going to ship that over to you so you can send it to the people who love you, and then so every time you walk in the room, that can happen.
Woo, makes me feel great.
So, Jonathan, where we always like to start is sort of in a world where we're all, so many people are claiming to be influencers, and there's always those big names that have influenced us, the names that we all recognize, like Winston Churchill, JFK, whoever it might be. But one of my favorite questions to ask my guests is, who might we not know or even consider who's been a major influence on your life? Because it's always nice to give them a shout out.
Wow. Yeah. So I've actually never had that opportunity to answer this question. The first person that pops in my head is my dad. So obviously my father, but because he gets a lot of credit in my book and things, I'd like to also say there was I had a professor, Jim Allard, in college, who steered me away from the finance stuff that I was studying and towards the philosophy. And that actually really supported later the finance part. So I really want to thank Jim Allard for making that effort to say that, hey, Jonathan, you're pretty good at this philosophy stuff. Why don't you study it some more?
Was he a professor in the finance world?
No, philosophy world. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So, but you were studying finance at the time.
Yeah. So I started trading stocks when I was 9 years old. My dad owned real estate. We never made a lot of money, but investing was always something that was core to our own thinking. He always said, Jonathan, you can be whatever you want in life. You just got to work really hard to get there. And so, ultimately we did that. But I started out studying finance and got kind of bored with it because I've been reading value line research forever. So starting off with Finance 101, I was like, this is not exciting. And so I was searching around. I found English Lit. That was interesting. And I found philosophy. And a couple of professors, Professor Allard and Marvin Shaw said, you know what, you're good at this. You like thinking deeply about this stuff. Why don't you go to grad school for that? And so I ended up switching in undergrad from finance to philosophy. And then further on in life, I went to grad school for Buddhist phenomenology. Who'd have thunk?
So that let's start there, because the book is about being mindful. It's about money and being mindful about money. So these two things, when we talked about this even earlier, I was saying to you that I think that one of the things that our listeners will find fascinating is that these two things seem contradictory. The mindfulness, the Buddhist practices, and then money and the market and the volatility of that and the consumerism of that and the materialism of that seems quite contradictory. So I know it's been your life's work to bring these two things together. Talk to us a little bit about these seeming contradictions and how we overcome them.
Yeah, the challenge is in the seeming. I mean, right? So if you look at all those people who are just very, very, very successful, they have these muscles of patience and discipline and habit, and they have this ability to ignore the headline of the day. And so it's the headline of the day, and it's the attention to the headline of the day that causes this anxiety or fear, and this moves us to action. We got to do something about this because Corona is something that, oh my God, it's going to get us all. The market's going to be crushed, and we better get out of the way first. And if we don't, then what's going to happen to us? So the reality is, there's a bunch of people at the same time that experienced the same craziness and saw the same danger and the same risks, who sat on their hands and did nothing. What is it about them that enabled that? It's reason, it's rationality, and so what mindfulness is a doorway through which we can access reason when reason is so hard to access. Moments of very, very deep emotional stress. Corona, the last couple of weeks in the US.
So walk us through that a little bit, because I want our listeners to have a grasp of that more than a conceptual idea, but even at a practicality. If somebody's got, let's make up a number, let's say $500,000, right? Got $500,000 invested in the markets, right? They got $500,000 in the markets, and there's a pandemic, then there is containment of that, people, being locked at home, shelter in place is the term. Then you've got social distancing and businesses not being open as quickly as one might like. That has a massive impact on economy and jobs, and all-time highs in job unemployment. Then you've got racial tensions, and you've got police brutality and protests and blah, blah, blah. So all that going on with this $500,000 that somebody has in the market, and they're like, oh my God, hell in a handbasket. And it's not a blip in the market, because this is now something that's been going on for 6 months, right? We're 6 months into the craziness, right? Which not a full sight end in sight right yet. How do we guide our listeners, our viewers to say, all right, let's not get crazy here?
Right. So I think there's two really big parts of this. I think the first part is developing a habit of being mindful, questioning the narrative. So mindfulness is a non-judgmental, right? That's critical. It's a non-judgmental awareness of the present situation as you experience it through your senses and through your mind, which is your emotions and your intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. So the first thing is to recognize you can't be if you're judging the moment, that's a problem. You're already applying a narrative, and you actually don't know how this thing, unravels. You have no idea how this thing resolves itself. And while we're going through it, the initial parts of the pandemic, people had no clue, and yet everyone predicted, in the US, a couple million are going to die. They're going to have hundreds of millions globally that are going to be infected. And maybe that was true, maybe it's not. But in that moment, no one knew. And yet we were given the narrative, and we all ran with it. Every media source ran with it. We ran with it in our own heads. And so we created this huge fear around this that was unnecessary because we didn't know. So we have to admit, it's humbling to admit that you don't know, but that's the reality, is you don't know. At the same time, all the negatives happening, things are happening on the positive. We have a whole bunch of people that are working on, epidemiologists and virologists are working on how do we resolve this? How do we make people healthier again? Whatever the issue is, whether it's global financial pandemic, or whether it's a financial meltdown of 2007, 2008, 2009, or whether it's .com in 2000, if you pick your thing, mm-hmm. There's always the negative, but then there's always the human response, and we always work together to make it better. So the first thing is understanding that humility. The second thing is having a practice of planning, orientation, and action to begin with. And so we talk about this a lot, to be market focused and performance driven. It moves you to make decisions you do not know the outcomes of. However,
that's standard, right?
Well, yeah, 95% of everything is that market focused, right. Performance driven. But there's a ton of research that says the people that do that, they don't provide better outcomes. They mm-hmm. can't provide better outcomes. So what do you do then? What's the other way? Well, what if you were goal focused and planning driven? And when you're goal focused and planning driven, and the world hands you what the world handed us, you go, okay, how does this fit into the long-term average? This is normal. This is part of the world. These things happen. Are they predictable? No. Are they new this time? Do they appear new? Yeah, they kind of appear new, but business responds to these things in a very similar way. We always have the same responses, even to every new thing that occurs. And we saw the same thing. And by the way, the person that had $500,000 4 months ago, the risk was that they changed something between then and now. Had they just sat in their hands, this is more evidence of, if they just sat in their hands and did nothing, right today, they'd have $500,000 again. Or again, it would have recovered almost all the way today. So more evidence that doing nothing, staying true to your plan, following the process works.
So it's kind of financially biting your tongue.
Exactly. Sit on your hands, folks. Sit on your hands.
All right. So, but at the same time, I just want to sort of have the voice there, and that is that I know people who are, like us, who are just a little bit less reactive. I don't know that I'm not reactive, but a little bit less, who actually, who maybe are doing better, and they manage to stay mindful and calm and whatever it is. But at the same time, that doesn't change the narrative out in the world. It doesn't change the fact that they are being bombarded, and maybe they're being bombarded by the people who advise and direct them in their financial investment.
Yeah.
Right. So, because a lot of those people are a little reactive. Right. So,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's my question to you. What do we say to these folks who are going, okay, I'm going to listen to Jonathan and I'm going to sit on my hands and I'm not going to react. Meanwhile, my partner in life is freaking the hell out. My kids are freaking out because, their future could disappear down the toilet like it's 1920 or 1918 or whatever it is. And then, and the guy who takes care of my stocks and my investments and all the rest of it, he's also having a freak out, and he sold his Bentley and bought a Toyota. So, how do, it's one thing to be calm. It's another thing to stay calm in the vortex of lunacy.
Totally true. So there's lots of stories about, and my dad's got a really good one. If we had a half an hour, we could probably go in and tell it, but I don't have a half an hour. The idea is you need to find a calm voice. And in any room of craziness, and Thich Nhat Hanh has a whole bunch on this as well. If you go into a room of people and everyone is screaming and crazy, you absorb that and you become screaming and crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You go into a room and everyone is screaming and crazy except for one person. And that one person is questioning the screaming and craziness, right? That is the thing that gives you the power to stand. And maybe other people are entering the same room and you can be that one person. Mm-hmm. And so how do you get to be that one person? That's the practice. That's an honest daily half an hour meditation practice. And I'm not joking about that. People say, really, Jonathan, I can have better financial outcomes if I meditate. Yes, you can. My own personal bottom came 13 years ago. I weighed in at 290 pounds. I had a lifestyle that was 3 times my income. I had a 2-year-old and another one on the way. I wasn't sure I was going to be around because I was drinking too much. I was eating too much. I was not taking care of myself. I had given up my meditation practice years ago, and something triggered, and I went, okay, something has to change in my personal life. I have to eat better. I have to actually stop drinking as much. I have to exercise on a regular basis. I've got to spend more time in nature. And guess what? I got to sit down and stare at a wall 20 minutes a day. And the minute I started doing that, like exercising all those disciplines, my life literally changed in like a 6-month period. Started losing weight, feeling better about myself, started making more money, started, being more aware of things. And by the way, this is just before, this is probably 2007. So this is just before the world fell apart. And so as the world falls apart, I'm actually getting these practices. I feel fantastic. The world's falling apart. I feel fantastic. I'm able to be that person in the room for my clients, for the people that I meet who are panicked and upset. Today, it's very interesting. Today, I've got a relatively new client today who I sat down in their restaurant in 2008. And I was calmly reading the paper or whatever. And they came over to me and said, Jonathan, how can you sit here so calmly? The world's falling apart. How can you do this? And I'm like, well, it's going to recover. And 10 years later, they become clients because of that moment of just peace. And they're like, oh, okay. I gave them permission to believe in the future and not be panicked about the future.
So let's just go there for a minute. What brought you to that moment? Because I think that there's a lot of people who, it's one of the things I've talked about with my own fault. I don't think that people listen. And by that, I don't mean to external forces, although those are true too, but often to internal forces. So there's something going on inside of us that says, you got to stop this shit. It's time, right? Yeah. You got to pull up your socks and do something different and behave differently. And I've told my story thousands of times, but I fell off a mountain in 1990, And people go, oh, that was the turning point. Well, yeah, it was, but not really. I fell 4 times total, you know. So what was the turning point? What brought it about for you? I mean, you
Yeah.
know, that's a pretty big weigh-in that you're at. There was a lot of factors going on.
Yeah. Yeah. So there was the moment was the trigger for change. And I know exactly the moment, but obviously the change then all happen the next moment. So the
Yeah.
trigger for the change for me was we were going for a little ski trip with um, my folks were there, my 2-year-old was there, my wife and I were there, and we're getting ready to go skiing the first day, and I had forgotten my ski pants. And my dad, I love my dad, like I love him. He's a big guy. He's not the healthiest dude. And he said, "Oh, just borrow mine." And I thought to myself, "That's crazy. It'll never fit." I put them on, and they were tight. So yep. Oh my goodness. Like,
They'll never
gotta,
fit, but not
yeah.
because they're big, but because they're small.
Exactly. That's not. Yeah,
Oh,
that wasn't okay.
how do you spell?
Yeah, exactly.
As you get
Yeah,
slapped in the
totally.
face.
Wake up call. And then like probably 3 weeks later, I'm at home and I'm just, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. I'm at home and I'm late night TV. I've got whatever bowl ice cream in front of me, and P90X comes across, the ad on television. And I'm like, all right, whatever. It's $180. I'll give this a shot. And I purchased it. And every day I just like the video said, I just push play. And every day I got up and I started working out. And the minute I started working out, I was like, you know what? The ice cream and the alcohol are killing the workout. Like, why do this and that? Like, I got to stop doing this other stuff. And then it just fell into place bit by bit by bit by bit. But it all started with, these pants are.
That's pants.
The pants got me.
But what about, because, you said you returned to meditation.
Yeah.
So, obviously you talked about studying finance, then studying Buddhism. And part of that study, I'm sure, was, deep meditation and all those practices. What dropped it off and what brought it back? Because my guess is there's quite a few people listening, viewing, who've either never done any of this and like, whatever. And there are people who are like maybe remembering that, 10 years ago I did do that and it kind of had some benefits. And maybe what brought you back?
So the thing that took me away was life. Like I went through leading up to the 290, right? You don't just, I used to be an athlete. You don't just get the 290 overnight. Shit has to happen to you.
It's work.
It does.
That's a lot of elbow grease ripped
Right, yeah.
up that ice cream spoon.
It was really, yeah. So it was, I went through a divorce. I moved my business 3 or 4 times. I had a business in the .com world that completely imploded. Completely. We were doing, I was very successful, one of the fastest growing groups in the UBS Payne Weber systems. This is 1999, 2000. We were just killing it, just doing an awesome job. And then 2001 hit, my group dissipated and just disappeared. And we agreed, hey, we're going to move from one firm to another, and one of us stayed behind, and that kind of sabotaged everyone else in the movement of the clients, and so everything fell apart all at once. And then 9/11 happened, all kinds of stuff happened along with that, and so I started down a pretty bad trajectory. Got a divorce, all kinds of other issues, and in that process, meditation wasn't my headspace was not a place to maintain a meditation practice.
But before that, before .bomb, a divorce, were you meditating?
Yeah, loosely, not as much.
Not as a discipline.
Yeah, not as dedicated. I had done it in a dedicated fashion when I was in school, because that was part of school. Like it was a daily thing. And we did Tai Chi, and we did daily practice was a thing that we did. But then entered the finance world. All this stuff happened.
Well, that's what see what I'm trying to get is this crossover. So I get that you went to school, you studied Buddhism, you did your meditation, you did your practices. I get that. Then you leave that and you go back into the financial world. Do you take meditation with you?
Yeah, initially? That's where the first thing that I did initially, and then it slowly fades. Kicking off a financial planning practice is 10. It's 10 days a week, 30 hours a day, and
yeah, I get it.
There isn't that much time. So my meditation went away slowly.
Right.
and I had to recover it later on.
Because it's interesting, because, and I really want to bring it to this, because it's interesting because what you're talking about here is a very interesting cycle, which is that we get caught up in things and we lose what's important, right? Not, it's not just meditation, but you talked about with your health, and you talked about with all these other things. And that is so often the case, is that we get caught up in, as Stephen Covey said, we get caught up in what's the emergency, but not what's important. So then you find your way back into meditation, and you said that did you stumble back into it?
It wasn't stumble. It was a recognition that this was a discipline. So now I've picked up my workout again. I'm starting I'm eating more healthy. What else can I do to move the needle?
Right.
Oh, there's this thing I used to do, and I remember feeling good when I did it, and not just feeling good, but having a more stable view of life and being able to carry through hard times when I did this. Mm-hmm. And that memory goes, okay, why don't I try this again? And it doesn't immediately happen. I can't immediately sit for 20 minutes. No one, when they kick off, can sit for 20, 30 minutes right out of the gate. It's 2 minutes. And then you're like, I got to move. And then so you boost that to 2.5 minutes, and then 3 minutes, and then 3.5. And that's a year. It takes a year to get to 10 minutes and 15 minutes. And then slowly, surely, you keep boosting it up. And the more you boost it up, the more time you spend in that kind of reflection, quiet contemplation, the better outcomes you get. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've always advised people to meditate for 4 breaths. Just 4 breaths. If you can just do 4 breaths in, hold, breathe out, box breathing, 4 in, 4 out, and you can do that for 4 times, and just focus on just nothing other than the breath, paying attention to the breath for 4 breaths. And if you get to 4 breaths and you can do 4 breaths 3 times in a row, great, then go to 5.
Yeah.
Because it really is. And I remember that's when I started, and my teacher said, the goal is 100 breaths of not allowing your mind to go anywhere else, but to the breath. And it took me 4 years.
Yeah.
It took me 4 years. And if somebody had said it'll take you 4 years, I'd have gone, it's not going to possible. And what people don't know is, at that time, I was devout, and I was spending 4 hours a day meditating, right? So I do a 90 minutes in the morning, 90 minutes at night, and 1 hour at lunchtime. And it still took me 4 years, because this thing is not quiet.
No, it is not. It is not.
The noisy little monkey in there. So it's fascinating, so I want to we're going to take a little break. And when we come back, I want to talk to you about where things are in the world today in the context of the market, and how we can remain or become more mindful, and whether it's a good time or a bad time. But for now, let's just let everybody know that this episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to us in part by our other podcast, which is Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how do we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your mind, your heart, your soul have been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real and often intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. This includes astronauts, neuroscientists, philosophers, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, entrepreneurs, entertainers, and some folks you might have thought of as being, well, we'll use the term a-holes, who are actually truly fascinating. These are people who will open your mind and get you to think in a bigger way about things you may not have even considered before. Simply go to dovbaron.com, that's DOVBARON.com, to find out how you can sink your teeth into an episode of Curiosity Bites. All right, welcome back. I'm here with my guest, Jonathan DeYoe. Now, we are talking about mindful money. We're talking about what that actually is. Is it possible to be mindful? Can we use this market to do that? So let's jump in on where we are in the world today. is this a good time to be in the market? I mean, people are like, is it a good time to get out? Is it a good time to get in? Is it time to sit down and do nothing? From your point of view, which I know is a different philosophy, is this a good time to, well, let's start with be in the market. So people are in it. Should I be in it?
So I would say that going back to the idea of being goal focused and planning driven, I would ask the question, what's your plan? So my plan is, I'm going to be working for the next 25, 30 years. I'm 48. I love what I do. I can't imagine doing anything else. I can't imagine retiring. And one day I'll have to pass the torch on to some other advisors and in the office. And it'll have to happen, right? I can't imagine that moment in time. But between this day and that day, my plan says I have to save a certain amount every single month. It says I should be invested in a primarily equities portfolio. And whether you're a real estate investor or a diversified portfolio investor, if your plan is to save money every single month and get enough for a down payment to buy another piece of property, you should continue doing that. If your plan is to put money in your 401k and get your company match, you should continue doing that. If your plan is like mine, to save as much as I possibly can every single month, so that I can bring the moment of freedom, even if I don't retire, I can bring the moment of financial freedom closer, then you should continue doing that. The reality is, every single time we see the dislocation like this, it recovers.
Mm-hmm.
Every time. There is no precedent for it not recovering. So why would you react in a way that is suggestive of this time it's not going to recover?
Mm-hmm.
Like that would be a narrative. That would be a statement of something that has never occurred before, right? You're letting the fear rule. And I think that's the mistake.
All right. So somebody finds themselves fairly liquid right now due to maybe they got fortunate. I know somebody who recently got a buyout from a partnership that took place, I think, like a week before the coronavirus the pandemic was announced, and they find themselves, and they're like, do I get in the market? Do I not get in the market? And there are other people who just like, I don't know, is this a good time to get in the market or get out for that matter?
No, I would never. So I'm never getting out of the market ever. It's not going to happen. I will rebalance. So, if you operate like I do with a diversified portfolio approach, then every year, every couple of years, every 5 years, the market's going to hand you something like this. Mm-hmm. When the market hands you something like this, the right behavior is just to rebalance, which means you sell the thing that is up now and you buy the thing that is down now. And that is a simple, brainless thing you can do. And usually I do this on a calendar basis. Every January I do it, every July I do it. But this time we did it in January, and then guess what? We got March. And so we did it again in March because we had the huge opportunity to buy more low. So we did it. And we're going to probably do it in July, and which means we're going to take some risk off the table in July. We're going to rebalance back to what the plan called for each of our individual clients. And I think that's the best you can do. Everything else is prediction. It's prognostication. It's guesswork. That's where you fail. That's where you make the mistakes. Because, and I've listened to a bunch of your previous podcasts. I know that you know this. Our brains are just filled with cognitive and emotional biases.
Of course.
And it's those cognitive and emotional biases that make you make decisions that hurt you in the long run. So, just like in meditation, we return to our breath. In your finances, return to your plan. What is your plan? If your plan says to do X, Y, Z, then just do X, Y, Z. Keep moving forward.
All right. So let's just sort of steer it off that for a minute and just say, well, okay, but there are people who make a living at being able to predict a little bit, economic futurists, many of whom are completely batshit crazy.
Yes.
But some of them were pretty good. some people would call out Ray Dalio. But at the same time, Ray Dalio is a hedge fund manager, and he's going to be focused on that. I don't know that that's a great indicator. And we also know that from not pretending I'm any level of an expert, but we do know that the market is not a true predictor of economies. Even the job market is a latent predictor. So there's a lot of things that are off. And is that why you're saying you have to just, this is the plan, this is what we do? We take 2 steps every Tuesday, we take 2 steps every Tuesday. If the ocean boils up, we take 2 steps every Tuesday. If the sun goes black for a couple of weeks, we take 2 steps every Tuesday.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I do understand that there are people, so there are always going to be people that, and usually this is sort of self-aggrandizing, right? There's always going to be people that say, well, I made this call 3 years ago and I was right about it. And it's true. There are some people, and you can look back in history and you can see that there are people that make a few good calls. Mm-hmm. However, there are no people that make consistently good calls. And well, let me back off that just a second. If you put on a bell curve, right, all the people making all the decisions, mm-hmm. you will have 1 or 2, the very outliers on the right side of the curve, who will make consistent good calls. You will not be able to tell if their next call will be a good call or not. And you will not be able to tell who is going to fall to the lower half of the bell curve. So you can't predict who will be the right predictor. Someone will be, but you only know that after the fact. And so we are left with the fact of not knowing, the humility, the requirement to admit that we don't/can't know, and yet we have to do something. So the only thing we can do is rely upon a very well thought out plan that we've put together already that takes into account that markets will hand us a 33 to 50% decline once every 5 years. That takes into account that every single year markets are going to hand us a 14, 50% peak to trough decline. And yet over time, they're going to do really, really well because we are a population that is growing, that has continuous wants and needs, that will always want bigger, better, faster, cleaner, more responsible, pick your whatever it is. There's more of us, we're living longer, we have wants and needs. That's why capitalism works. That is the driver of our societies.
Now you're opening up a whole other can.
I know I am. I know.
Like, does capitalism work is a whole big discussion, particularly today at this point as we record this.
It is wicked broken. It is wicked broken.
Right.
It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But the idea of when lockdown is over, I am going to go to restaurants. Mm-hmm. Right. Before I can go to restaurants, someone has to build a restaurant. Someone has to invest in and hire people and have a menu. But I like restaurants, and a lot of us like restaurants. So that's going to continue existing. There's also, there's no question in the US that we have 400-year legacy. We've got to figure out and solve for, and we are horrible at that. And it's a big, massive problem. It will be, I hope that right now we're beginning the steps that we should have begun 400 years ago. But I think maybe right now we are. I'm hopeful that, I don't know.
Yeah. What is something that, what do even the wealthiest need to know about money that in your work, you find that even wealthy people don't really get this? What is it they need to get? What is it, not just the wealthiest, but all of us really need to get? I mean, I think your advice could be pretty easy to sort of push onto everybody, but even the wealthiest people, who've got billions of dollars, what is something that they need to know about money? All of us need.
What can I, who does not have billions of dollars, tell the wealthiest about their money? It's a good question, and I don't know that I have an answer, except that money is not the solution to all these problems. I mean, that's when you look at the title of the book. It's simple practices for reaching your financial goals, and here's the critical part: increasing your happiness dividend. It is the focus on money and on more and on consumption and on this next thing that if I only get it will make me happy. It is that issue that creates more unhappiness than any other issue. And so I actually do have some clients that are very, very, I don't have any clients that are billionaires, but I have some clients that are very, very well off. And one of the stimuluses to write the book was one of my clients who is very well off, has enough, and is never happy. And so the question is, why are they not happy? And I think a lot of it is because we live in this illusion that money is somehow going to make it for us. And it doesn't. Money is something that ensues from a life well lived, from a serious plan, where that's the goal, and you make it happen, da, 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 da. But happiness is also something that can ensue from a life well lived. You can't be a target. Money can't be the target. Happiness can't be a target. There are things that happen when you do the rest of your life well, which is why health, good food, meditation, these for me are the first 2 hours of every day. What can I do to stabilize life so that money and happiness can ensue? Hopefully that can be something that's a lesson, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we all know the adage that money doesn't necessarily mean happiness. I think everybody knows that, but nobody believes it. And that's the problem. One of the problems we live in a capitalistic consumer world is we all know the philosophy, money won't make you happy, but we're like, but I'm damn gonna give it a good try.
Oh yeah, and you can. It does take away a lot of pain, right? So there is a certain amount of money that once you have a certain amount of money, you can create opportunities for satisfaction and opportunities for happiness with a certain amount of money.
And that's the key, right? It's opportunities. I know that I have clients who are in those brackets that we talked about. They're certainly not happier than anybody else I've ever met in any other bracket, but they have access to things or ways of being that can make them happier. So, they can hire somebody to come and teach them to meditate and sit with them every day to meditate or whatever it is, but it still doesn't guarantee happiness by any stroke of the imagination. And I honestly believe what Oprah said years ago, that money doesn't change people, it magnifies them.
Yeah.
If you're a miserable goat, you'll be a bigger miserable goat with money. If you're a deliciously generous, kind, loving person, with money, you'll just be a deliciously kind, loving person magnified. That's it.
Yep.
Very simple.
I totally agree. That's wisdom right there.
Yeah, right there. So when you look out in the world and you think about, and again, it might be your own clients, but you think about what you wrote about in your book, what you talked about in the book, who's someone that even that we might know who's really appears to be doing a great job of it? I mean, there's certain people that come to mind, but I don't know if they are the right analogy of here's somebody doing exactly what we're talking about.
Well, there's two actually that pop right to mind that I think are, and they're not my clients. They're people that most of the world respects in terms of their financial position and in terms of their generosity. So Warren Buffett and Bill Gates,
right?
And Warren Buffett is he's famous for don't sell. In 1987, I don't remember the exact numbers, but in 1987, when the market fell 22% in a day, he lost on paper something like $387 million personally on paper in one day. And what did he do? Nothing. Right? And what did he do in 2008 when the world fell apart? He purchased. He was a buyer. He bought Goldman Sachs. He bought transportation. He bought banking. He bought the things that were the most suffering and the most down. He bought the brands that were going to last and survive. This this is really wise financially. But he also says, you know, I think the tax rate should be a little higher on me than they are on my receptionist. I think that most of my wealth should actually be going to good causes after I'm gone. Bill Gates is the same way. He created something that changed the world. Microsoft
Mhm.
changed the world, and he was made totally wealthy by that. But he's also committing to give a lot of that back and to do a lot of good work. And he's curing disease and polio, and he's active on 4 different strains of potential vaccines for COVID-19. I mean, he's doing the good work, and he is very successful financially. But it just as a human being, I think he'd agree too. You know, maybe the tax rates are a little bit low for us at that level.
No, it's because the person I was thinking of when I asked you was Warren Buffett, who is famously stoic about his investments, in that he's not reactive, or doesn't appear to be reactive. But even looking at the market thing, I mean, even if you buy in a down market, we know that in '08 there were a lot of blue chip, somewhat believed recession-proof companies that disappeared. Right? I mean, they literally disappeared. Some of them were consumed, of course, by other companies, but many of them just disappeared. And there are big players in the world today who will disappear due to COVID and the pandemic. So I think that a lot of what you're saying about sitting on your hands, I get it and I understand it. And at the same time, the other part of it, which is the opportunity, how do you know where the real opportunity is? Because that big investment company who's always done well suddenly disappeared in '08.
So, I mean, that's totally true. So when you sit in your hands, you have to sit in your hands with the right kind of process first.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the opportunities that this kind of a dislocation gives us, and maybe it's past, I mean, we went down and we're back up right now. Maybe we go down again. I don't know. If we go down again, there's another opportunity. And that opportunity is, hey, maybe you've done it wrong till now. Maybe it's actually time to get much more broadly diversified, so that when '08 happens and one of those, 2 of those, 3 of those, 5 of those, 10 of those really big companies just disappear, it doesn't affect you.
Right.
Like, you own 5,000 companies. You own 12,000 companies. You own those companies in a way that the academics support, that they work for long term. And what are those? There's three things that academics tell us work. One is, over long periods of time, not every time, but small companies outperform large companies, right? Second one is value outperforms growth. Not happening right now, but over long periods of time, it happens, right? Third one is profitability. So if you focus on companies that produce and are profitable, they will continue to be so long term in the aggregate. 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 could go under any time. Mm-hmm. So if you have the right process, broad global diversification, and you apply those 3 sort of basic, small value profitability, you don't have to worry about what one company or one issue or one geography does, because you own it all. And what you're investing in future consumption. You're investing in the people who want to improve their lives, because they're going to do it whatever company exists. Right. I'm going to go for Indian food again, whether it's my favorite restaurant or a different one. I'm going to go to Indian food again. I will consume Indian food again. Once this door once the latch on the economy is open and I'm allowed to, I will go and do it again. Maybe my favorite restaurant doesn't make it. That's okay. There's others. Like, I'll find another.
Maybe you can move to Texas and all the restaurants are open.
That's true. I'm in Berkeley. None of them are open.
I know. You guys got no out right now. We're coming close to the end of the show, and I want you, of course, to be able to tell our people where they can find out more about you and about your resources. But before we do that, one of the questions I like to ask at the end of every show, which is, what is a simple, practical piece of advice that you would like to leave us with, potentially from your book, that people could put in action, like preferably in the next 24, 48 hours?
Stop predicting, start planning. Stop predicting, start planning. Predictions you can't possibly know, and your brain gets in your way when you try to predict. Start planning, start planning, lay it out, take the small steps, little steps at a time, start predicting, start planning.
So just to go deeper on that, does that mean stop listening to people who predict as well?
So if you're going to listen to one person that predicts, you have to listen to 100.
Right.
So you have to let them cancel each other out, and you have to get different opinions. And I think you can stop listening to most people who are predicting. But
Okay.
if you can't, because you can't avoid news and everyone's on the internet and you just can't avoid it, then you have to go deep. You have to listen to a lot of it, because then you realize there's disagreement around every corner. And it's once you read it all, that no one actually knows, and they all make great arguments because that's what they're supposed to do.
Well, Bill Gates is a good guy who is doing stuff to create vaccines, and he's also trying to control the world and wipe out the population. Depends on who you're listening to.
Right, exactly. Right. I read both of those. Right, exactly.
Yeah, of course, right? So depends on who you're listening to. And by the way, your cognitive biases. In the sense of when you, just to come back to the last part of what you were saying there, which is the plan, again, like predictions, there are a million people offering plans. Financial planners are, almost as ubiquitous as coaches. And yes, I was poking at both of those groups. So it's not like I'm going, oh, sorry for it. No, I mean, I was. So how do you know who to listen to, even at the plan sense, Jonathan? Because that in itself can be confusing for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the most difficult question that somebody out in the public might stumble on, because it's impossible to tell until you walk down the path with a planner if the planning is going to be any good. And the way you tell, though, the first rule is actually they have to be a fiduciary. And you can just ask that. That's a question you can ask right up front. And the reality is about maybe 20-30% of the people that offer plans are fiduciaries, and you could ignore the rest, completely and totally ignore the rest. So that gets rid of a huge chunk of them. But that leaves that 20 or 30% that you have to kind of determine if they're going to be quality or not. So how do you determine that? Well, they better ask you for every single piece of information in your financial life, all about all your goals. And basically they want to lay out what it's going to be like for you to live the rest of your life, cash flows, everything. They should be able to tell you, these are the assumptions we are making, and those assumptions better square with reality. If they can't tell you the assumptions, they don't have a plan. If it doesn't square with reality, it doesn't have a plan. So what does that mean? That means when you go in to talk to somebody, you've got to know kind of what are reasonable assumptions. Like, what are reasonable inflation rates? What are reasonable, income increasing rates for your life? What are reasonable rates of return in your life? How can you actually tell if this plan that they're going to put all these numbers based on these assumptions, that works? They should be able to easily bring in all the data you give them, but then the plan is only as good as the assumptions. And so you've got to be able to judge the quality of the assumptions going into those.
But again, to push back, isn't an assumption a prediction?
Right. It's
don't listen to anybody who's predicting, but listen to assumptions.
Fair enough. So what are you predicting? Are you predicting a specific outcome or a long-term average outcome?
Right.
I'm not predicting next week's going to happen next month, next year, but I know that over 20 years, the likelihood of having a little bit higher inflation in the last 20 years is high, but not so 3%. Use that as an inflation prediction. I don't know what it's going to be, but then you can that gives you the baseline of a plan, and then you should stress test the plan. What happens if we don't get that? What happens if we get 8% inflation? What happens if our average returns aren't 8? What happens if they're 2? What happens if they're negative in the next 20 years? What happens? What do we have to do in terms of our behavior, our plan, to make sure it still works? And that's really, it's about leverage you're pulling and about the outcomes that the decisions you have to make because of the leverage you're pulling. You're gonna take a risk either now or later. You have to take your risks. Which risks are you more apt to agree with long term?
Great insight. Thank you, sir.
There we go. You bet, Doug.
Please tell our listeners, our viewers, where they can find out more about you, your book, and all your resources.
So obviously, the best place to find out about the book is to go to Amazon and just order a copy. And by the way, we didn't talk about this, but if you go through the book, and there's a little exercise at the end of every chapter in the book. And the reason we wrote the book was that so people that went through and did those exercises at the end of the book, they actually have a financial plan. It's written for them without an advisor. They have a plan, right? So that's one of the reasons for the book. The best place to find out about us is to go to mindful.money. You can find all kinds of stuff about what we do, our educational resources, as well as our personal CFO services.
So mindful.money. So don't be putting in a .com. It's mindful.money. I know that's sometimes confusing for people, but now there are other ends to URLs that are not .com. So mindful.money. That's where you can find out more. And you can also find more about Jonathan at DeYoe Wealth Management, I think, right? Is that right?
Yeah, that's there right now. It's all becoming mindful.money. It's all
mindful.money. Okay, fabulous. And of course, Mindful Money is on Amazon, and you can find the book there. Jonathan, it was a pleasure. Thank you, sir. Honor. I really appreciate you being with us very much.
Mine, Dov. Pleasure is mine.
And I hope you'll stay with us to the end. And for you, dear listener, if you'd like to hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode or any past episodes, either go to our Facebook or our LinkedIn groups. You just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. It doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your true capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. Because unified meaning, or as we call it, finding your dragonfire, is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about that reactive mind of yours and how it's getting in the way of you having financial stability. I'm Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to create and reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.